Subcommittee will come to order without objection. The chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. We welcome everyone to this first hearing of the Select Subcommittee. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. November 18th, 2021, an FBI whistleblower discloses to Republicans on the House Judiciary that the FBI created a threat tag for parents voicing their concerns at school board meetings. April 26, 2022, another FBI whistleblower discloses that the FBI employees are being run out of the Bureau for attending conservative political events. May 11th, 2022, another FBI whistleblower discloses that dozens of parents with the threat tag designation to their name are investigated by the FBI. This also happens to be the same whistleblower who said the FBI leadership, not the rank and file members, the FBI leadership is rotted at its core. His clearance has been revoked and he's been suspended. June 7th, 2022, another FBI whistleblower is retaliated against after giving feedback on an anonymous survey. July 27th, 2022, another FBI whistleblower discloses that agents are pressured to reclassify cases as domestic violent extremism cases to hit self-created performance metrics. September 14th, 2022, an FBI whistleblower discloses that the FBI views the Betsy Ross flag as a terrorist symbol. September 19th, 2022, another FBI whistleblower discloses that the Washington field office is deliberately manipulating January 6 case files to make it appear that domestic violence extremism is on the rise. He's been suspended. November 4th, 2022, another FBI whistleblower discloses the FBI accepts private user information from Facebook without the user's consent, and information is from only the conservative side of the political spectrum. This is only a sampling. In my time in Congress, I have never seen anything like this. Dozens and dozens of whistleblowers, FBI agents coming to us talking about what's going on, the political nature at the Justice Department. Not Jim Jordan saying this, not Republicans, not conservatives, good, brave FBI agents who are willing to come forward and give us the truth. And this is just the FBI. Americans have concerns about the double standard at the Department of Justice. Americans have concerns about the Disinformation Governance Board that the Department of Homeland Security tried to form. Americans have concerns about the ATF and what they're doing to the Second Amendment. And of course, they have concerns about the IRS and the thousands of new agents who are coming to that organization. And finally, there are concerns about what we've learned in the Twitter files, where big government and big tech colluded to shape and mold the narrative and to suppress information and censor Americans. Over the course of our work in this committee, we expect to hear from government officials and experts like we have here today. We expect to hear from Americans who've been targeted by their government. We expect to hear from people in the media. And we expect to hear from the FBI agents who have come forward as whistleblowers. We think many of them will set for transcribed interviews, as one did on Tuesday. And we believe several of them will come and testify in open hearings. And finally, we expect to bring forward legislation that will help protect the American people. We hope our Democrat colleagues will work with us. The day the resolution creating this select committee was debated and passed, though, Mr. Jeffries, Mr. Nadler said Democrats would, quote, fight us tooth and nail. We hope that attitude changes. We want to work with them. Protecting the First Amendment shouldn't be partisan. Protecting the Constitution shouldn't be partisan. And protecting the fundamental principle of equal treatment under the law should not be partisan. With that, I yield to the ranking member for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan. Nobody disputes the important role of congressional oversight. I know firsthand how important it is to ask questions and demand answers of the federal government. In the ordinary course of business, that work informs the legislative process. In extraordinary times, when misconduct in the executive branch threatens to undermine our democratic institutions, congressional oversight can serve to protect the integrity of our republic. For example, I'm proud of the role I played as an impeachment manager in the second impeachment of President Donald Trump in the aftermath of the attack on the Capitol. That bipartisan work was both a measure of accountability and a sign to the American people that Congress had no intention of being bullied into giving up on a peaceful transfer of power. But there is a difference, my colleagues, between legitimate oversight and weaponization of Congress and our processes, particularly our committee work, as a political tool. I'm deeply concerned about the use of this select subcommittee as a place to settle scores, showcase conspiracy theories, and advance an extreme agenda that risk undermining Americans' faith in our democracy. Some of today's witnesses would have us believe that the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation are part of a deep state cabal. One even wrote a book describing the FBI itself as a threat to democracy. The Department of Justice and the FBI do not always get it right. History is full of examples of these agencies getting it very, very wrong. We have colleagues in this Congress who have been subject to politically motivated, hateful, racist investigations by our government. That does not logically follow that every investigation or criminal inquiry by the FBI or the Department of Justice is political or ideologically based. But in our current climate, with domestic terrorism on the rise and hate speech normalized by national politicians, the Department of Justice and the FBI are doing their best to protect us from sliding into chaos. This past Monday, the FBI captured 2 individuals, one a neo-Nazi leader and founder of an Anti-Waffen group who were plotting a racially motivated attack on Baltimore's power grid. They said their goal was to, quote, completely destroy this whole city, end quote. Last week, the FBI infiltrated and disrupted a major cyber criminal group extorting schools, hospitals, and critical infrastructure around the world. And last summer, the FBI engaged in a mass violent crime enforcement effort that took nearly 6,000 violent criminals off of our American streets. Let's not forget the tremendous work of the FBI and the Department of Justice after the attacks on our homeland on September 11th, 2001. Some of my Republican colleagues love to talk about the threat of violent crime, but they appear oblivious to the fact that their dangerous rhetoric and baseless accusations against the Justice Department and FBI itself at times pose a direct threat to those organizations' ability to do the work that they are doing to protect our communities. Recent threat bulletins have highlighted a shocking increase in threats of violence against law enforcement agencies and a significant uptick after the FBI executed a search warrant at President Trump's property at Mar-a-Lago. The Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association has vehemently denounced what he described as, quote, politically motivated threats that are unprecedented in recent history and absolutely unacceptable, end quote. Unfortunately, examples of these threats are not hard to find. Last year, someone threatened to plant a dirty bomb outside the FBI headquarters. Another attempted to storm the Cincinnati FBI field office while wearing body armor and carrying an AR-type rifle. A third was arrested after he made a credible threat, stating, quote, every single piece of expletive who works for the FBI in any capacity, from the director on down to the janitor who cleans their expletive toilets, deserve to die. You've declared war on us, and now it's open season on you, end quote. These allegations are deeply troubling, and I hope that the chairman and members of this subcommittee will be mindful of the risks that go hand in hand with heated rhetoric. A rush to accusations and subpoenas without a factual basis and without any effort to engage with agencies through the accommodation process flies in the face of due process and demeans congressional oversight process. It makes a mockery of our institution. As a former prosecutor, I'm even more troubled by the suggestion that the subcommittee may attempt to investigate ongoing criminal investigations. As the head of the Reagan Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel wrote years ago, granting Congress access to information about active criminal investigations will, in effect, make Congress a partner in the investigation, creating a, quote, substantial danger that congressional pressures will influence in the course of the investigation and potentially, quote, hamper prosecutorial decision-making in future cases. This would not only damage law enforcement efforts, it would shake the public's confidence in the criminal justice system. I hope not, but I suspect much of the investigations the majority, my Republican colleagues, want to look into and potentially muck up involve criminal investigations into former President Donald Trump. I want to be crystal clear. My Democratic colleagues and I will resist any attempt by this subcommittee to derail ongoing, legitimate investigations into President Trump, any other president, and others within his orbit. During the course of this subcommittee's work, I suspect we will hear both members and witnesses describe the events of January 6, 2021 in ways that simply do not mesh with reality. When this happens, I would encourage everyone watching today to review the impeachment record and report of the January 6 Select Committee, which lays out the true facts in shocking detail. I recently sent a letter to the chairman noting that, despite our policy and political differences, I am hopeful that there may be matters of investigation within the stated mandate of the subcommittee under which we may collaborate. I meant this. I mean this. And I still hope that we can find common ground and explore it in a bipartisan manner that respects the due process rights and interests of all involved. The chair and his colleagues continually use the moniker of protecting free speech. That sounds good. I hope they all recognize that there is speech that is not constitutionally protected. Racist, hate, incitement to violence. And I also hope, and if the protection of true speech, of free speech, extends to all Americans. We'll see. I hope that we can use this subcommittee to conduct legitimate oversight to help advance policies to address the real challenges that Americans face every day, rather than undermine every agent, officer, and prosecutor on the job. Government abuses of power do not solely rest with the executive branch. It can, and we've seen it come from the legislative branch as well. On our present course, however, this exercise seems little more than a political stunt designed to inject extremist politics into the legislative oversight function and the justice system. The American people deserve better than that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Thank the ranking member. Without objection, all of their opening statements will be included in the record. We will now introduce our first panel of witnesses. Senator Chuck Grassley has represented Iowa in the United States Senate since 1981. He is currently the ranking member of the Senate Committee on Budget. He is former chairman and ranking member of the Committee on the Judiciary and the Committee on Finance. Welcome, Senator Grassley. Senator Ron Johnson has represented the state of Wisconsin in the United States Senate since 2011. He has served as the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. We welcome you, Senator Johnson. Representative Jamie Raskin. Congressman Raskin has represented Maryland's 8th Congressional District since 2017. He currently serves as the ranking member on the Committee of Oversight and Accountability. And we have with us former member Tulsi Gabbard, who represented Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District for 8 years in the House of Representatives. For nearly 20 years, she has served our country in the Hawaii Army National Guard and the U.S. Army Reserve, including deployments in Iraq and Kuwait. We thank all of you for your service. Our longstanding committee practice is to not ask questions of our colleagues and former colleagues that appear before us. In light of that practice, our first panel will have 10 minutes to deliver their testimony. Again, we thank you for being here, and Senator from Iowa is recognized for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan and Ranking Member Plaskett, for this opportunity to appear. I thank you for inviting me to come here. And what I'm about to tell you sounds like it's out of some fiction spy thriller, but it actually happened. and it happened in our own government. Congressional oversight is a constitutional demand. We dedicate our careers to it. I have, at least. And during the course of my service, I've ran countless investigations. In the past few years, I've never seen so much effort from the FBI, the partisan media, and some of my Democrat colleagues to interfere with and undermine very legitimate congressional inquiries. It's because of a triad of disinformation and outright falsehoods. As one example, look at Crossfire Hurricane. Bit by bit, piece by piece, it's been deconstructed and shown to be politically motivated investigation, which it was. We all know now that it was the Democratic National Committee, along with the Clinton campaign, who colluded with the Russians. They used a former Russian spy, Fusion GPS, and law firm to create a fake dossier and then tried to cover it up. Now, the most recent example of this triad at work are efforts against my and Senator Johnson's ongoing Biden family investigation. That investigation started on August 14th, 2019, when I was chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, with a letter that I wrote to the Treasury Department. My letter was about a questionable financial transaction subject to the Committee on Foreign Investment that related to a matter involving the Biden family. As our investigation continued and advanced, Democratic leadership and partisan media began their attack on our investigation. This is where that spy thriller starts to heat up. On July 13th, 2020, then Minority Leader Schumer, Senator Warner, then Speaker Pelosi, and then Chairman Schiff sent a letter with a classified attachment to the FBI. That letter expressed a purported belief that Congress was the subject of a foreign disinformation campaign. The letter was targeted at the Johnson-Grassley investigation. However, the classified attachment included unclassified element that attempted and failed to tie our work to a Russian agent named Andrei Derkash. Unsurprisingly, those unclassified elements were leaked to the press to support a false campaign accusing Senator Johnson of me of relying on material from a Russian agent and thus advancing Russian disinformation. Of course, it was pure nonsense that the irresponsible media portrayed this all as the truth. Guess what then? Chairman Schiff claimed without any evidence whatsoever that our oversight work was rooted in Russian disinformation. Of course, you know, he conveniently left out that our oversight work was actually rooted in official U.S. government and Obama administration records. Then, guess what? Senator Blumenthal also wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post accusing our investigation of, quote, perpetuating Russian disinformation in the U.S. Senate, end of quote. And then, guess what? Minority Leader Schumer and then Ranking Member Wyden tried to offer a resolution in the Senate disparaging our Biden investigation. They, in a sense, were basically calling us Russian stooges. Pretty simple. That violated Senate rules in their efforts and, of course, were appropriately shut down. On July the 16th, 2020, mere days after the July 13th letter, then Ranking Members Wyden and Peters wrote a letter to me and Senator Johnson asking for a briefing from the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force. Our staff and the ranking member staff had already, now remember, we had already received a briefing March of 2020 that put the issue to rest. So why another briefing? The point being, there was no real purpose for another briefing, let alone a member-level briefing, other than to further undermine our investigation. Some of our Democratic colleagues weren't interested in anything but using the briefing to try and destroy our investigation. But at these Democrats' insistence, the FBI caved. In August 2020, Senator Johnson and I had that infamous briefing from the FBI that was needless. And then, as we had feared, the contents of that briefing were later leaked to the Washington Post, even though the FBI had promised us confidentiality. That leak outrageously and inaccurately connected that FBI briefing to our investigation in another effort to falsely label our good government oversight work as Russian disinformation. Now, the Wall Street Journal editorial board was on top of it because that board did the right thing and wrote a piece about the briefing titled, quote, "The FBI's dubious briefing. Did the Bureau set up 2 GOP senators at the behest of Democrats?" End of quote. So, simply put, the briefing was unnecessary and completely irrelevant to the substance of our investigation. It was only done because the Democrats wanted to do so. They could try and smear us, and the FBI wrongly did their bidding. To this very day, Director Wray refuses to provide Senator Johnson and me, as constitutional officers, records relating to that briefing, including the alleged intelligence basis for it. Director Wray has consistently failed to perform duties required of his position. Now, another example of this Democratic disinformation campaign involved a George Kent, former State Department Deputy Assistant General. Senator Johnson and I ran a transcribed interview with George Kent. Before the interview, Democrats acquired material from that Russian agent, the same one that I mentioned earlier. At the interview, Democrats, not Republicans, Democrats asked Mr. Kent about the same material. Mr. Kent said it was disinformation. Now think about that. After all the spears the Democrats were throwing at the two of us, in the end, it was the Democrats who introduced Russian disinformation from a Russian agent into the investigative record as an exhibit. A foreign agent whom our own intelligence committee warned was actively seeking to influence U.S. politics. Not me or Senator Johnson, not our staff. It was the Democrats who inserted disinformation from the Russians into our official record. The partisan media and Democrat leadership ought to be ashamed of themselves for fake information if they spread about our investigation. So in the end, they all failed to stop Senator Johnson and me. On August 23rd, 2020, Senator Johnson and I released our first Biden investigation report. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk in this town about Treasury records, and you ought to pursue them. In that 2020 report, we made public the contents of many Treasury records. But we didn't stop there. We issued another report, November 18th, 2020. Our report exposed extensive financial relationships between Hunter and James Biden and Chinese nationals connected to the communist regime. More precisely, Chinese nationals connected to the Chinese government, military, and intelligence services. With the new Congress, of course, Senator Johnson and I transitioned to be ranking members. We hadn't forgot about what the triad of partisan media, FBI, and Democrats, and leadership did to us. So we don't stop. We did what any congressional investigator worth their salt would do. We gathered even more records to prove them all wrong. We acquired authentic bank records that substantiated findings of our previous two reports. They financially linked Hunter Biden and James Biden to entities and individuals connected with the communist Chinese regime. We also acquired business records with Hunter and James Biden's signatures alongside those same Chinese nationals. How were they supposed to be paid? According to bank records, there were wires from companies linked to the communist regime. In 3-floor speeches, we made those bank records public and asked this question to our partisan detractors, the same ones that I mentioned throughout my remarks, and maybe a lot of others. Are these official bank records Russian disinformation? We also shared hundreds of pages of bank records with U.S. Attorney Weiss. He failed to respond. Now, as our investigation continued, whistleblowers approached my office with allegations that the FBI created an assessment in August 2020, the same month that the FBI briefed me and Senator Johnson. According to these whistleblowers, that assessment was used by FBI headquarters to improperly discredit negative Hunter Biden information as, you might expect, disinformation. As a result, this scheme allegedly caused investigative activity to entirely cease. It's been further alleged to me that in September 2020, the same month Senator Johnson and I released our first report, those FBI headquarters personnel began placing their analysis of the credibility of reporting related to the Biden family in what I've been told is a restricted access sub-file. Further allegations to my office involved FBI personnel at the Washington field office who improperly ordered information to be closed by the FBI related to Hunter Biden's potential criminal conduct in October 2020, just before the election, even though it was verified or it was verifiable. Other whistleblower disclosures to my office make clear that the FBI has within its possession very significant, impactful, and voluminous evidence with respect to potential criminal conduct by Hunter and James Biden. These disclosures also allege that Joe Biden was aware of Hunter Biden's business arrangements and may have been involved in some of them. We still aren't sure what's been done with this information. The FBI's track record doesn't create much faith that the information is going to be followed up on. It's clear to me that the Justice Department and the FBI are suffering from a political infection that, if it's not defeated, will cause the American people no longer to trust these storied institutions. It will also threaten the American way of life. Unfortunately, what you've heard from me, this story of government abuse and political treachery, is scarier than fiction. It really happened. But, Mr. Chairman, your committee here, so assembled, has an opportunity to help us write the last chapter in this real-life drama. You must relentlessly pursue the facts and the evidence. Senator Johnson and I will do the same and willing to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Grassley. Senator Johnson.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, members of the Select Committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify about my personal knowledge of and experience with federal agencies being weaponized against U.S. citizens. Senator Grassley has just described the most egregious examples undertaken by multiple actors and agencies to undermine and sabotage our joint investigations. But to begin, let me be clear. Throughout my testimony, I am not talking about the men and women in government who conduct themselves with integrity and patriotism. But at the outset, it is important to recognize corrupt individuals within federal agencies that I am talking about are not acting alone. They operate as vital partners of the left-wing political movement that includes most members of the mainstream media, big tech social media giants, global institutions and foundations, Democrat Party operatives, and elected officials. As the Twitter files reveal, these actors work in concert to defeat their political opponents and promote left-wing ideology and government control over our lives. My eyes began opening to this reality with the disclosure of how the Obama administration weaponized the IRS to harass Tea Party groups by denying them tax-exempt status. My personal knowledge and experience with agency corruption began in 2015 when I became chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. My first investigation ultimately revealed the extensive editing of then FBI Director James Comey of his July 5, 2016 statement that exonerated Secretary Clinton regarding her use of a private email server for official business. The edits were clearly made to downplay the seriousness of her actions. It is important to note those partisan edits were made by the same cast of characters in the FBI that would initiate and drive the corrupt Russian-Trump collusion investigation. During our investigation of the FBI's involvement in the Russian collusion hoax, Senator Grassley and I uncovered and made public highly partisan text messages between FBI employees Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Strzok's December 15, 2016 test, quote, "Think our sisters have begun leaking like mad. Scorned, worried, and political, they're kicking into overdrive, has never been given the attention it deserves." In 2022 interview with Jeff Girth, Strzok said he now believes, quote, that it is more likely the text came not from the CIA, but from senior levels of the US government or Congress. Who might those leakers be? Why aren't reporters who received the leaks outraged at being fed false information? And why haven't they blown the whistle on the leakers? Why didn't the mainstream media robustly investigate how they were all duped? The answer is they weren't duped. They were complicit in creating and fostering the political turmoil our country has been experiencing over the last 6 years. Those leaks were a key ingredient in the most destructive, political, dirty trick in US history: the creation and promotion of the false Russia-Trump collusion narrative. To be most effective, however, that narrative relied on coordination between government actors and the media. And the left had allies in the FBI. Unable to verify the Steele dossier, the FBI offered Christopher Steele $1 million to provide verification. By December 2016, the FBI knew they had investigated Steele's primary subsource as a Russian spy. In the main body of the Department of Justice Inspector General's report on FISA abuse, FBI official Bill Priestap is quoted saying the FBI, quote, didn't have any indication whatsoever, unquote, of Russian influence on the Steele dossier. Our investigation uncovered redacted footnotes to that same document that completely contradicted that statement. Why would Priestap's false statement appear in the report, but the truth be hidden in classified footnotes? 14 months later, in February 2018, the FBI still briefed the Senate Intelligence Committee that the dossier had validity. When the Mueller report found no evidence of collusion, the left engineered an impeachment of President Trump. The cooperation between the House Intelligence Committee and the impeachment whistleblower remains murky. Then Chairman Adam Schiff originally denied his committee had contact with the whistleblower prior to the filing of the complaint, a claim Schiff later attempted to walk back. The genesis of the impeachment saga has yet to be fully investigated. It needs to be. Prior to the impeachment proceedings, Hunter Biden's obvious conflicts of interest in Ukraine became public, and Senator Grassley and I began investigating. We didn't target Joe and Hunter Biden. Their actions demanded it. On December 9, 2019, the FBI issued a grand jury subpoena and took possession of Hunter Biden's laptop from John Paul McIsaac, a computer shop owner in Wilmington, Delaware. As the FBI left his shop with the laptop, Mr. McIsaac recalled one agent saying, quote, "It is our experience that nothing ever happens to people that don't talk about these things," unquote. That statement was the opening salvo in a coordinated effort over the next 10 months to sabotage any public revelation of Hunter Biden's laptop or any wrongdoing connected to the Bidens. Senator Grassley has provided a number of examples of that sabotage, and we will release a report that goes into far greater detail than we have time for today. When available, I hope everyone will read it. Perhaps the most egregious and effective act of sabotage against the truth was the public letter signed by 51 former intelligence officials that claimed the laptop had, quote, "all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation," unquote. That letter itself was an information operation that interfered with and impacted the 2020 presidential election to a far greater extent than anything Russia ever could have hoped to achieve. Each of those intelligence officials needs to be interviewed to determine how that letter was masterminded. While we all condemned the violence on January 6th, we all condemned the violence on January 6th. The fervor in which the Biden Department of Justice has pursued those protesters and rioters stands in stark contrast to their lack of interest in the summer of 2020 rioters. Serious questions regarding instances of unequal application of justice and violation of January 6 defendants' due process rights remain unanswered. SWAT team arrests and treatment of prisoners are legitimate concerns. And neither the Senate nor House investigations adequately explained why the Capitol was so woefully unprepared or how many federal agents and informants were in the crowd. COVID has exposed the awesome power that can be misused by government officials. The loss of basic freedoms has been nothing less than breathtaking. Our response to the pandemic has been a miserable failure. A miserable failure. Over 1 million lives lost. The human toll of the economic devastation caused by shutdowns that did not work. And the loss of learning and other psychological harms to our children. Emails between Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins reveal how they intended to use their awesome government authority and power to accomplish a, quote, devastating published takedown, unquote, of scientists who offered a different approach to handling the pandemic. Have emails also revealed Fauci's attempt to hide his agency's role in funding dangerous research that might have led to the creation of the deadly coronavirus? We don't know because those agencies won't provide the unredacted documents. Federal health agencies have not been honest or transparent. I've written over 50 oversight letters, and the vast majority of the questions I have asked have either received an inadequate response or no response at all. I have requested information that the public has a right to know. Doctors who have had the courage and compassion to treat COVID patients using their off-label prescription rights have been vilified, censored, and their careers destroyed. Other health professionals have noticed, toed the line, and remained silent. Parents who, out of concern for their children, question school boards and administrators have been labeled potential domestic terrorists and must now fear scrutiny from the federal law enforcement. With the release of the Twitter files and the Missouri and Louisiana lawsuits against the Biden administration, we are getting a clearer picture of how active government officials were in suppressing free speech and controlling the narrative. It is also becoming obvious that the World Health Organization has been captured by the Chinese government, that global institutions in general have been captured by the left, and that some charitable foundations are exerting far more power over public policy than should be allowed. Chairman Jordan, members of the committee, you have important work before you. Although you have been generous in granting me 10 minutes to offer my testimony, I have barely scratched the surface in describing the complexity, power, and destructive nature of the forces that we face. Our founders fully understood that government was necessary to avoid anarchy, but they also knew that government power was something to fear. That's why they devised a set of checks and balances to limit government's power and influence over our lives. Ideally, a free press would hold all government officials equally accountable. But with today's media mostly biased to the left, congressional oversight is needed now more than ever. And because the administration is not cooperative and transparent, Congress needs whistleblowers from agencies throughout the federal government. I urge men and women with integrity to come forward and reveal the truth. Senator Grassley and I will do everything we can to encourage bipartisan oversight in the Senate and stand ready to assist your efforts in any way that we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. We look forward to your report. We hope that is coming shortly. We now recognize Representative Raskin for his testimony.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, dear colleagues, our framers were Enlightenment thinkers who wrote us an Enlightenment Constitution. They wanted government to operate on the basis of facts, science, and common sense, not ignorance and superstition. They wanted America to usher in an age of reason. With the separation of powers, the framers constitutionalized Newton's third law of motion, checking every action with an equal and opposite reaction. And Congress in Article 1 was given the central role of legislating and making progress for our people. The oversight function is not specified in Article 1, but the Supreme Court has always said that it's implied, something necessary and proper for the legislative function. As Madison famously said, those who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power that knowledge gives. Dear colleagues, your subcommittee could conceivably become part of a proud history of serious bipartisan oversight stretching from the Teapot Dome investigation to the Boeing investigation, to the Watergate hearings, to the tobacco hearings, to the Select Committee on the January 6th attack. Or it could take oversight down a very dark alley filled with conspiracy theories and disinformation, a place where facts are the enemy and partisan destruction is the overriding goal. Millions of Americans already fear that weaponization is the right name for this special subcommittee. Not because weaponization of the government is its target, but because weaponization of the government is its purpose. What's in a name? Well, everything is here. The odd name of the Weaponization Subcommittee constitutes a case of pure psychological projection. When former President Donald Trump and his followers accuse you of doing something, they're usually telling you exactly what their own plans are. By establishing a select subcommittee on weaponization, they're telling us that Donald Trump's followers, who obviously control the subcommittee, will continue weaponizing any part of the government they can get their hands on to attack their enemies, defined as anyone who stands in the way of their quest for power. To be clear, that's not an exclusively partisan operation. They've proven that they will weaponize the government not just against the other party, but against anyone who refuses to bend to the will and whim of one Donald Trump, whether that's a lifelong Republican state election official like Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, a foreign head of state like President Zelensky, a political movement like Black Lives Matter, a once close personal friend and ally of Trump's like his personal lawyer Michael Cohen for many years, or even a sycophantic Trump cabinet appointee and lifelong Republican like Attorney General William Barr, if these people break from the habits of lying and lawlessness that define life as a camp follower in the cult of Donald Trump. But if the weaponized MAGA campaign isn't exactly partisan, it is entirely political because it's got an overriding electoral focus, and you know what it is. It's all about restoring Donald Trump, the twice impeached former president, to the office he lost by 7 million votes in 2020 and tried to steal back in a political coup and violent insurrection against our constitutional order on January 6, 2021. You disagree? Well, please don't take my word for it. As our chairman might say, just listen to what Chairman Jordan himself had to say 6 months ago at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Dallas, where he was predicting GOP victory in the 22 elections and promising that oversight of Hunter Biden's laptop and the claim that the federal government is treating moms and dads, like the ones in this room, like terrorists, would be the centerpiece of the GOP's work in the House when they got it back into power. Relaxing with a friendly interviewer, Chairman Jordan gave the game away entirely. Quote, "All those things need to be investigated just so you have the truth," he said. Plus, that will help frame up the 2024 race when I hope and I think President Trump is going to run, and we need to make sure that he wins. We need to make sure that he wins. This call to arms for the 2024 presidential election was met with wild applause from the CPAC audience. I urge every member of this subcommittee to go and watch the interview. Now, of course, a serious bipartisan committee focused on weaponization of the government would zero in quickly on the Trump administration itself, which brought weaponization to frightening new levels across the board. Consider just a few examples I have time for, illustrative of dozens I can provide the subcommittee. One, in a 6-week period in 2020, Donald Trump fired or removed 5 different departmental inspectors general simply for doing their jobs and not caving into Trump's coercive political demands to cover up different forms of administration wrongdoing and misconduct. April 3rd, 2020, Trump informed Congress he was firing Intelligence Community Inspector General Michael Atkinson, who had received a whistleblower complaint in August 2019 about improper demands made by Trump to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. In May 2020, Trump fired Steve Linick, IG of the State Department, later claiming he had no idea who he was and saying that he fired him only at Secretary Pompeo's request. That inspector general was investigating Pompeo's decision to bypass Congress in sending billions of dollars in arms to Saudi Arabia. I don't have time to get into the details of the others, but May 20, he fired Mitch Bem, the transportation deputy IG. He relieved of duty Glenn Fine, acting IG for the Defense Department. He removed Christy Grimm, the acting inspector general of HHS. Second, breaching the traditional separation between the president and Department of Justice criminal prosecutions, Trump and his obliging sycophantic attorney generals, like Jeff Sessions and William Barr, repeatedly pressured career prosecutors to go hard or go soft in particular cases, always seeking to reward Trump's friends or to punish his enemies. If weaponization of the Department of Justice has any meaning, this is it. Consider the egregious case of Gregory Craig, a White House counsel under Obama, who was targeted by the DOJ for alleged FARA violations and finally indicted on a single count of making false statements. He was acquitted unanimously by the jury in less than 5 hours, and one of his lawyers observed that the Department of Justice had hounded his client without any evidence and without any purpose. Former U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman said that Greg Craig never should have been prosecuted. Consider the case of Michael Cohen, the president's former lawyer and confidant for many years. In August 2018, He pleaded guilty to campaign finance violations over large hush money payments he arranged before the 2016 election to keep porn star Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal from talking about sexual affairs they had with Donald Trump. You guys remember this one? Well, after Barr became Attorney General in February of 2019, he worked to kill further investigations related to those payoffs and suggested that Mr. Cohen's conviction on campaign finance charges itself be reversed, even though 6 months had already passed since Cohen had entered a guilty plea. Amazingly, after Cohen was imprisoned for a year and then being transferred out of prison to home confinement during COVID-19, Barr and the DOJ intervened to block his transfer because Cohen would not immediately accept as a condition of his ankle bracelet home confinement not to engage in First Amendment activities, specifically writing and publishing a book about Donald Trump or saying anything in public on TV or in the social media about Donald Trump. Cohen had already been home for 2 weeks when this unconstitutional demand from DOJ appeared, and when he and his attorney dared to ask questions about it, 3 federal marshals showed up with handcuffs and shackles, and he was returned to the Otisville Correctional Institute. There he spent 16 days in solitary confinement before they were able to get his case before a federal district judge who immediately found that Barr's purpose, quote, in transferring Cohen from release on furlough and home confinement back to custody was retaliatory in response to Cohen desiring to exercise his First Amendment rights to publish a book critical of the president and to discuss the book on social media. Can you think of a more egregious example of weaponizing the Department of Justice for nakedly political purposes than imprisoning and putting in solitary confinement the president's own former lawyer simply because he wanted to exercise his First Amendment rights? Consider the John Durham investigation. At the urging of Republicans, including the good chairman, the John Durham Special Counsel investigation was set up in 2019 by Barr to try to find wrongdoing by intelligence or law enforcement agencies in the origins of the Mueller investigation. And we've heard some of the murmurings about this today. After 4 years and millions of dollars spent, the Durham investigation closed as a total flop without unearthing anything like the deep state conspiracy that Republicans have been denouncing around here for years. It couldn't find anything of substance to it. Yet Barr and Durham kept pressing in clearly abusive ways. I hope your subcommittee will investigate. One former DOJ prosecutor, Robert Luskin, a defense lawyer who represented 2 witnesses before the Durham probe, told the New York Times he was shocked. This stuff had my head spinning, he said. When did these guys drink the Kool-Aid, and who served it to them? Amazingly, when prosecutors participating in this wild goose chase actually came into possession of evidence of a real offense from Italian government officials of a potentially major financial crime committed by Donald Trump, Durham was suddenly deputized to investigate it, and the whole investigation mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Trump's enablers now want this subcommittee not to examine the Durham debacle as a case study in dangerous weaponization of the justice function, but rather to pick up the baton from the defeated and demoralized Durham team and to keep the wild goose chase going today. Third, the former president had no qualms about literally weaponizing our nation's law enforcement and military against First Amendment activity for his political purposes. I commend to you the debacle that took place on June 1st, 2020 in Lafayette Square, where they mobilized an interagency law enforcement troop and then unleashed them on horseback with pepper spray and batons, billy clubs, rubber bullets against a totally lawfully present crowd. Mr. Chairman, I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that any of the investigations that have taken place during the last 2 years have been perfect. I'm sure they could have been improved in some ways. That's a legit thing for you to ask. But it's one thing to engage in systematic oversight driven by a commitment to facts and the truth, and something radically different to set up a platform for a series of hit-and-run partisan attacks that are just vindictive, vendetta-driven, and meant to frame up a presidential campaign in 2024. And some of the new rhetoric we've been hearing can be dangerous, as the ranking member was pointing out. After the execution of a perfectly lawful judicial search warrant in Palm Beach in August of last year, politicians and media figures began denouncing the FBI, the whole FBI and FBI agents, in vitriolic terms. And since then, the FBI and DHS have observed an increase in violent threats posted on social media against federal officials and facilities, including a threat to place a dirty bomb in front of FBI headquarters and issuing general calls for civil war and armed rebellion. And we've heard those calls before in this chamber. On August 11th, last year, a person wearing a technical vest and armed with an AR-style rifle and nail gun attempted to forcibly enter the FBI Cincinnati field office. When officers responded, he fled the scene and a pursuit followed. During a prolonged standoff with the FBI, the man fired multiple shots at Ohio State Highway Patrol. Mr. Chairman, the public is skeptical about this strange new venture with the strange new name that's being launched, because so many of the members involved have done everything they can to block the January 6th committee's investigation of the worst insurrectionary domestic violent attack on an American election in the American Congress in our history. And the public wonders whether members who refuse to comply with congressional subpoenas themselves should be issuing congressional subpoenas to other people. Oversight must be organized around a comprehensive search for the truth that will lead to progress, and not around revenge, which will lead us as a country to chaos and ruin. I hope the subcommittee will find a way to embark upon a truly bipartisan agenda with all members participating and agreeing on a common agenda, and I wish you well and Godspeed on behalf of this difficult venture that you are about to proceed on.
I thank the gentleman, and I can assure the gentleman from Maryland that we respect the FBI agents, particularly the ones who have come to us, the dozens who have come to us, and we will focus on the facts, something I felt was not exactly presented in the proper way in your testimony. I understand that the senator from Wisconsin has a number of documents he'd like to ask to be entered in the record, so without objection, those will be entered, and we'll get those from you, Senator Johnson. We now turn to our former colleague, the former Democrat member from the great state of Hawaii, Congressman Gabbard.
Thank you very much, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, and members, aloha. Thank you for the opportunity to be here to speak with you today. Benjamin Franklin said, "Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech." I love our country and I cherish our God-given freedoms that are enshrined in the Constitution. Like every one of you, I took an oath, both as a soldier and as a member of Congress, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, I've had the privilege of serving alongside many of you in Congress for 8 years, representing the people of Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District, serving on the Armed Services and Foreign Affairs Committees. I'm honored to be able to continue to serve as a Lieutenant Colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves now for almost 20 years, where during that time I deployed to 3 war zones and participated in multiple overseas training exercises, where I had the opportunity to see firsthand what life is like in countries where there is no First Amendment, where there is no free press, where government deems itself to be the moral arbiter to its people, dictating to them what is right and wrong, what can and cannot be said, who can speak, who cannot, who is free to worship, and who is not. Now, our founders understood the importance of enshrining our God-given freedoms in the Constitution and Bill of Rights to ensure that no matter which party or person may be in power at any given time, our founding documents serve as a reminder of these freedoms that are guaranteed to every American. Thomas Paine said, "He that would make his own liberty secure must guard even his enemy from opposition. For if he violates this duty, he establishes a precedent that will reach to himself." We cannot be so short-sighted as to thinking silencing speech that we don't like today will not result in our own voices being silenced tomorrow. The work that you've all been charged with in this committee affects all Americans, and it is too important to allow it to fall victim to partisan politics. No matter how deep your differences, we must all agree to stand on the side of liberty. Unfortunately, right now we live in a country where many Americans are afraid to speak freely, afraid to express themselves, afraid to actually have real open dialogue and debate, afraid of losing their job, being canceled, or being accused of a crime, which could happen if recently introduced legislation criminalizing so-called hate speech is passed into law, speech that, no matter how abhorrent, is still protected under the First Amendment. Now, this fear and this culture of fear and self-censorship is not unfounded. We have individuals in our government often working through their arms in the mainstream media and big tech, doing exactly what our founders rejected, trying to control what we, the people, are allowed to see and say under the guise of protecting us from so-called misinformation or disinformation. Now, of course, they appoint themselves as the sole authority and voice of truth, of information, backed by the most lethal force on earth with the power to target anyone they deem a threat. They alone are the ones, self-designated, who get to decide what is true and what is false, what is information and what is misinformation or disinformation. They say they're doing this for us, that they're doing this for our own good, to protect the people. But in reality, the truth is they think that we're too stupid to think for ourselves, too stupid to discern for ourselves and to draw our own conclusions. Now, the idea that we must just blindly accept whatever the government or those in power tell us is true goes against the very essence of our Constitution and Bill of Rights, which were created as a resounding rejection of the reign of kings, churches, and authorities. They tell us we must blindly trust them or face the consequences, even though our government has a long history of lying to us, the American people. Just to cite a few examples, we were lied to about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which spurred the war that I and so many others served in and so many others sacrificed their lives in. They lied for almost 2 decades, claiming success in Afghanistan, when in fact we saw failure after failure after failure, coming at a great cost to this country. We saw lies about Vietnam that were revealed in the release of the Pentagon Papers. We saw lies about our own government illegally surveilling Americans. These are just a few examples. There are many more. Ranking Member Plaskett talked in her opening comments about how individuals in the FBI also throughout our country's history have abused their power, weaponizing those agencies to advance their own political interests. This is not and cannot be reduced to a partisan fight. The stakes are too high. We all must recognize our own responsibility to stand against such abuses. But as we sit here today, the danger is that if we choose to reject or challenge whatever those in power declare is the so-called truth, we are accused of being anti-authority. We are accused of being a danger to society, accused of spreading misinformation, and are then targeted, smeared, and called things like Russian asset, white supremacist, bigot, racist, sexist, extremist, traitor, and so on. More dangerous than any baseless smear, our own government institutions, which exist to serve the people, they are being weaponized against us. The Department of Homeland Security declared a heightened domestic terrorism threat due to 3 factors, the first of which is, quote, the proliferation of false or misleading narratives which sow discord or undermine public trust in U.S. government institutions, end of quote. They are the ones who get to decide what those false or misleading narratives are. Former CIA Director John Brennan said in 2021 that, quote, members of the Biden team are now moving in laser-like fashion to try to uncover as much as they can about what looks very similar to insurgency movements that we've seen overseas. An unholy alliance frequently of religious extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nativists, and even libertarians. End of quote. Attorney General Garland charged his newly created domestic terrorism unit with targeting those who hold, quote, anti-authority views. That included parents who dared to protest at Board of Education meetings, concerned and standing up for the right for themselves to have a say in their children's education. A draft copy of the Department of Homeland Security Quadrennial Homeland Security Review outlined their intent to target quote-unquote inaccurate information on a whole host of topics, to include the origins of COVID, vaccines, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and U.S. support to Ukraine. Their misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation team exists to, quote, counter all types of disinformation. Once again, they get to determine what this disinformation is. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg revealed on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast recently that Facebook limited the exposure of the New York Post Hunter Biden laptop story just weeks ahead of the 2020 election, only after talking with the FBI. Twitter took similar action, but they recently apologized for doing so, recognizing that their decision was wrong. The cozy relationship between White House officials, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and big tech is now well documented and results in private companies not restricted by the First Amendment doing the dirty censorship work of those in government who are not legally allowed to do so themselves. The threat big tech monopolies pose to our democracy is real and serious. I've had personal experience with this. After the first Democratic primary presidential debate in 2019, I was the most searched candidate of the night. Unfortunately and suddenly, my Google Ads account was mysteriously suspended without any notice or explanation. There were no responses to our multiple attempts to resolve whatever problem could have caused this, but after some time passed, magically my account was reinstated, again with no explanation or apology. But their actions limited my ability to connect with voters who were actively seeking more information about my candidacy and why I was offering to serve them as President and Commander-in-Chief. This has not only happened to me, it's happened to other candidates running for various offices. Joe Kent, running for Congress in Washington State, is one I know personally of. This happens all the time, with these big tech monopolies interfering in our democracy by manipulating search results based on whatever it is that they want the American people to know about a particular candidate or issue that should be concerning to any one of us and all of us. Now, recently, we've learned that with the release of the Twitter files detailed by Matt Taibbi and others, high-level former FBI and CIA and other government officials were behind Hamilton 68 and their list of 644 social media accounts supposedly linked to, quote, Russian influence activities online. Now, Hamilton 68's work was widely cited as fact by institutions like Harvard and Stanford, by mainstream news organizations across the board, by members of the House of Representatives and Senate from both political parties, including the head of the Intelligence Committee. The problem is, it was false. Twitter themselves determined that the vast majority of accounts that Hamilton 68 targeted on this list of 644 were, quote, neither strongly Russian nor strongly bots, end of quote. They were mostly anti-establishment American voices from across the political spectrum. I was one of them. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton accused me, a sitting member of Congress, a soldier, and a candidate running for president, of being, quote, groomed by the Russians. Her baseless smear worked as intended. It was something that was repeated over and over, headline after headline, article after article, pushed online in every way. This had the harmful impact that was intended. I could give you many examples of interactions that I've had with people throughout that campaign and still today. But I remember one in particular that had an impact. Just weeks after this statement was made, I was in South Carolina at a campaign event when an elderly woman came up to me, and I could tell that she was very disturbed. She came up and she put her hands on my shoulders and she looked into my eyes, her eyes welling up, hands shaking, and she said, "Look me in the eyes. I need to know if you are working for Putin." She was serious. I couldn't believe it. I looked her straight back in the eyes and expressed to her from my heart how much I love this country, so much that I'm willing to die for it. More recently, U.S. Senator Mitt Romney accused me of treason a crime that is punishable by death under our laws. I challenged him to back this serious allegation up with evidence. What was this based on? There was no response, no explanation, no evidence, and certainly no apology. Now, these accusations are often shrugged off as, well, hey, it's politics. People say things about each other all the time. That may be easy for some of you to say, but for somebody who wears the uniform, this is serious. And it's serious not only to me, but to my fellow service members and veterans, every one of us making a decision at some point in our lives to raise our right hand, prepared and volunteering to lay our life down for this country. What does that mean in reality? It means that before every deployment, in our own hearts, we have to make peace with the possibility that we may not come home. It means writing letters to our loved ones, trying to find the words to express our love and gratitude, knowing that that may be our final goodbye. It means for those of us who do come home, doing our best every single day to honor the great sacrifices of our brothers and sisters who paid that ultimate price. This is much bigger than me or any one individual. When those who dare to challenge the establishment are targeted by this powerful conglomerate of government, corporate media, and big tech, weaponizing all that they have against the people for their own selfish gain, it has a dangerous chilling effect on free speech, and it sends a very powerful message. If you dare to challenge us, we will come after you. The more we allow this to happen, we start looking less and less like a democratic republic and more like a banana republic. Instead of a government ordained to secure these rights, we are now increasingly facing a government determined to take those rights away. George Washington warned, "For if men are to be precluded from offering their sentiments on a matter which may involve the most serious and alarming consequences that can invite the consideration of mankind, reason is of no use to us. The freedom of speech may be taken away, and dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to slaughter." We have to stop this insanity and protect these sacred freedoms. Vanquish the fear and self-censorship that is now pervasive. Every one of us taking action to breathe new life into the open marketplace of ideas that is at the heart of a thriving democracy, encouraging vigorous and substantive debate, encouraging people to think for themselves so we can draw our own conclusions, where we can disagree without devolving into hate, where we can respect each other as fellow Americans and treat each other with aloha. The work you have before you is critical for all of these reasons. The stakes are high. The consequences, for better or worse, will be long-lasting. And for the sake of the American people, our freedom, and the future of this country we love, I pray we can set aside our partisan differences and commit to standing together to defend the constitutional right of every American to live free. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Congresswoman Gabbard. We appreciate those fine remarks. Congressman Raskin, we thank you for being here. Senator Johnson, we thank you as well for your testimony. The committee will stand in recess for 5 minutes more or less to get ready for the second panel.